Yeah, I was born in 1954 on the Isle of Man, and then I was sent away to an orphanage in Canada, by my my paternal grandmother. When there, the girl that had taken me initially to Canada chose to steal me out of Canada and take me to the U.S. And because she knew who my birth mother was, she used my birth mother's identity. So I did know for the first 14 years of my life, I did know my name. And I thought that was my mom, and I thought that was her name. But when she got really ill when I was about 14, and she had done a lot of domestic work, she was working for an American couple, and they had a son that wasn't well or whatever, and they just got rid of him. So they bought me from her and gave me his identity, gave me his social security number, gave me his date of birth, gave me his name, told me I was adopted. Immediately after that, they took me to California, and I went to high school under that name. I went in the service under that name. And so I thought I was an American for virtually all my life. And it wasn't until, much later, when the first inkling that I was born somewhere else was that I did get a copy of my baptism certificate from that man that had bought me. When he got mad at me, he threw me, told me I wasn't American, I wasn't his son, get the hell out of his house. And I had a baptism certificate that said Isle of Man. And I had to figure out what Isle of Man meant. Yeah. And believe me, in America, most people have no idea that it exists. It's like Isle of Avalon. Nobody knows it exists, So that kind of started the thing. In 1972, the man had tried to, because I had graduated high school a bit early, he had tried to initially get me to go into the Air Force. Because we did not have a great relationship, I purposely went out of my way to aggravate him by running down and joining the Navy. Because it was as far away from the Air Force as I could figure. One's in the sky, one's on the sea. Can't get any different, I went into the service not to be a combat soldier. I went in as what they call a Navy corpsman. A corpsman is a medic. Equivalent to over here would be like an emergency room technician. So I learned to do surgery. I learned to deliver babies. I went through the whole spectrum. And I was attached to the United States Marine Corps. I ended up being sent to Vietnam while the main forces of troops were being sent back. I was with the Special Operations Unit. The best way I could tell you is that equivalent to here is what I was Marine Force Recon is similar to your SAS. And so we were highly trained in long-range reconnaissance and doing covert operations. That's what our job was. And so we didn't get glory. We didn't have headlines. We didn't do it. We did all the basically dirty deeds that had to be done. I come to find out later that, of course, the man that had bought me had enough political clout that he actually got me put off to Vietnam as a way of trying to punish me for not being a good son. And then he took all the credit about how well I did in Vietnam, even though I was wounded. It was behind his tutelage that I became such a good soldier.
So Jamie was in like the thick of the war in the Vietnam, and as a medic, when the soldiers are running this way, Jamie's running that way to rescue the guys who are down. So he comes back from the war with pretty heavy PTSD.
Yeah, severe, what they called severe PTSD, which is one reason why, since I've been back, Guy Fawkes Night has not been the best for me. For some reason, people want to blow up things. That's not a good thing for me. Yeah. So, anyway.
You fell in with a biker gang then?
Well, I didn't fall. I fell in with a bike club. There's a big difference between bike clubs and bike gangs. Thank you. Yeah, I started riding with a motorcycle club because when I got out of the service, my job was I had a motorcycle repair shop, and I restored pre-1960s motorcycles. I always thought there was a beauty in that artistry of iron, just like I drove 1950s cars. There was something. Nowadays, you look at a car, and if they're all white, you don't know who's who. Back then, you could tell by body styles and shapes and all that stuff. So I was in with a motorcycle club because originally I got with them because they had a clubhouse right next to my business, and they needed a good mechanic. And I liked riding, and so I would go on runs with them and stuff, and eventually I became a member of their club. I had gone through a real bad marriage and divorce right after I got out of the service, and I lost custody of my oldest son. I eventually got remarried, and then I ended up having a second son. And then I moved back to Fresno because I'd been living in San Diego when I was in the service and when I first opened my bike shop up. And when I came back to Fresno, that's where the man lived that had bought me, and everything kind of started going downhill after that.
Yeah.
So
this is what led to Jamie coming home one day to find a corpse in his living room.
there was a man that in a roundabout way I thought was related to a half sister of mine. The woman I thought was my mom had 3 daughters. I thought they were my sisters. I wasn't related to her, so I wasn't related to them, but I didn't know at the time. The youngest girl had, by accident, which we found out was not an accident now, had come and found me. And so she moved to Fresno with her 2-year-old son. My son at that time was 2. And this man that was her uncle, her dad's brother. And he and I had a lot of problems because he liked to beat women. And I have a problem with people who hurt children, women, or elderly. And so there were a number of times I'd get in arguments and fights with him. He'd pull a knife on me, and I would end up disarming him and put him in a nice sleeper hold and put him down on the ground. And the cops would get called. They'd get there. He'd be waking up. He didn't want to press charges because he's carrying weapons he's not supposed to have anyway. He liked to carry sword canes and boot knives and belt buckle knives and pistols in wallet holsters and things like that. Things that a good citizen's not supposed to have. So he didn't want to.
And cyanide. This guy was about to kill some people with cyanide.
Yeah. He had purchased some cyanide, which he had planned to use in hollow point bullets. He was going to fill the hollow points with cyanide, cap them with wax, and then shoot people. So he ended up one day, about a month, roughly a little over a month or so before he died, punching who I thought was my half sister after he had choked her 2-year-old son. And it took my wife and his daughter, his step or whatever, to pull him off. It took 2 women basically to basically get his hands off a 2-year-old's throat. Luckily, the boy wasn't permanently damaged, though he did have bruising and stuff. I was out of town, so I didn't know about these things till a bit later. But he started punching this girl, Jackie, when they were driving around town. Well, she had already been to this place called the Marjorie Mason Center, which is a battered women's center. But it looks just like a house because the idea is they don't advertise battered women's center, so people can't find where the battered women went to, type thing. It makes, And so she knew where it was, so she just drove down the street, jumped out of the car, and ran into a house. He assumed it was some friend of hers. She called the police, said he's threatened me, he's hit me, and he's carrying weapons. Police came. They found him sitting in the car. He's got a .25 automatic, semi-automatic pistol inside a wallet holster with 1 bullet already inside the chamber and 6 in a magazine, and there was no safety stops on it. He had a sword cane that was a 2.5-foot long blade in it, and that was one of the things that the DA used in my case, kept saying, oh, he's disabled because he has a cane. No, he had a cane because it had a sword in it, not a cane because he needed a cane. And then when they got him to the police station, they realized he also had this funny belt buckle that came up on a police notice that it might be a knife. And sure enough, it was a 2.5-inch blade that folded off of a belt buckle. So he goes into jail, and he's in jail for about 2.5, 3 weeks, trying to get out. And at some point towards the end of that period, the girl Jackie calls my wife over to the house and says, hey, he needs his asthma capsules. Take these to him at the county jail. And my wife went, oh, okay. Now, I've told my wife not to have anything to do with him. I didn't want him around us if he gets out of jail, any of that stuff. He's hit Jackie. You had to wrestle with him. He chokes little boys. I got a little boy. Ain't happening. You know, I've already been in numerous physical altercations. There were police reports that we'd had these, what they called mutual conflicts. Okay. So my wife tries to take these medications down to the county jail. Now, I know you guys don't have like county jails over, but it'd be like, imagine somebody going down to the prison and going, hey, I've got these pills for this guy in here. He really needs these. Would you give these to him? Well, I don't think they'll let you do that here. But they wouldn't let you do it in the county jails either. And county jail is where you go before you actually get sentenced. It's just where you're waiting for trial. So they told her, no, you can't do it. Okay. So she did talk to him, did tell him that when he gets out, if you get in touch with her, she had his medication. Okay. So I don't know if she's done this. She's done everything I told her not to do, which was typical. My wife was very strong-headed. So I have building skills. So I had friends that were builders. And so I was out on a job helping a friend put a roof on. I come back home. It's about 10:30 or 11 at night. No lights on in my house. I'm assuming my wife and my son are asleep. I notice my wife's car is not there. So, okay. So I pull in my truck and I go open the door and I walk in and I turn the light on and there's a man laying on my floor. The man that's not supposed to be anywhere near my family, the man that, as far as I knew, was still in jail. And I immediately checked the pulse, and the man was dead. And the DA used to go, well, how are you sure he was dead? Well, because I saw a lot of dead in the military. That was my job, is to take care of people wounded and try to keep them from being dead. So now, in my mind, the first thing I can think of is that I can't call the police because they already know I've been in fights with this guy. Now I'm going to say, oh, by the way, the guy I've been fighting with for the last 6 months is now dead on my floor. I'm a biker. I'm an ex-military veteran. And I have a problem with this guy in past. So for not the smartest move I could think of, but my first thought was, I need to get him away from my family. I didn't know if he'd been there with my family or if he'd been there laying in wait for me to come home because him and I didn't get along. For all I knew, that's why he was sitting in the dark. I didn't know if he had a heart attack or anything else because there was no visible marks on him. And he was 58 years old, but he liked to drink a lot. Yeah. But the only medical condition that I knew he had is that he would take an Absima capsule at nighttime before he went to sleep so he could breathe easily in the night. So I put him in a sleep bag and I go to put him in the back of the truck so I can just get him away from my house. And he was supposed to have been released, I found out, down to the rescue mission. So that's where I was planning to take him, was down to that side of town. And I figured that they'll find him and it'll be all good. About the time I start doing that, my wife pulls up. She tells me that he'd come over for dinner. She'd fed him. He died. All right. What are you going to do about this? Okay. So I've got him in there. So she jumps in the truck with me. We start driving off, and she says, well, you've got a mess to clean up, don't you? And I said, well, what happened? And she goes, well, so then she tells me that about having given his medication to take down the jail. When he came back, he contacted her because the medication they gave him from the jail, they always give you like a week when you get out to have till you tied, that he was out of it. So he came over to get the medication. He ate dinner, took a pill, sat on the couch for a moment, fell off the couch, and he was dead. And she said that I didn't know what to do, so I took our son away. And he's too heavy for me to move, so I had to wait for you to come home. So we're driving around, and suddenly she starts screaming at me, do you have a shovel? I said, no. Why would I have a shovel? Well, what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. Well, why do you mean you don't know? Aren't you supposed to be good at this kind of stuff? What, moving dead bodies? No, I'm not good at moving dead bodies. The last time I had to do it was in the military, and we put them in a bag, and we sent them home. Here's this totally out of my thing. So for about 2.5 hours, I have this very manic, very screaming woman hollering at me about, what are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? What are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? And so we're driving around, and then all of a sudden, I see false dawn about to happen. Just starting to get light. I know soon there'll be. And we're out in a semi-rural area, and I don't even know exactly where I was at the time. So I pull over. I take him out in the sleep bag. I set him up against a fence post right off the road where I pulled off. I take out his wallet. I take out a pen and paper and I write, in case of emergency, call this number. And I give him my home phone number. And I put it back in there. Because I didn't want him not to be identified. I did not want him not to be given proper burials and stuff. I didn't want him just to be. So in my own, as many people have said, stupid manner, I did this.
You're being too honest.
Well, I don't know. That's it's what I asked. So I did that, and a couple days later, the police called, said, "Hey, we found this body. Your number's in there." I said, "Oh yeah." He says, "When was the last time you saw him?" And I told him 3 weeks ago, which had been true prior to finding him dead on my floor, because I saw him just before he went to jail. I didn't figure that they wanted me to tell him the other part, at least at that time. Then the problem is that the girl, Jackie, decided that since part of what he had done to her was take her welfare money, she got my wife and her, and they went down, and she took checks that he had at her house, because that's where he lived before he went to jail, and she forged the checks, and she endorsed the checks, and she cashed the checks. And when they did the handwriting, it all came back that Jackie had done this. But then Jackie said, but Sandy was with me. So now my wife is now an accessory to forgeries. So Jackie did forgeries. My wife's now accessory to forgeries. It's about 3 weeks after he was dead, they get arrested for the forgeries. The initial autopsy said the man had been strangled. So, of course, who is the primary suspect in strangling the man? The guy who has 5 police reports for putting him in chokeholds and making him go to sleep. So now the thing is that, well, I must have done it because I just did it too long. And now he didn't make it from this one. So now I've been arrested for that. But they're trying to figure out a lot of things about where it happened, when it happened. They don't have them, and for the most part, my wife wasn't saying anything, I wasn't saying anything, and at that time, Jackie wasn't. Till they came to Jackie and said, "We're going to give you 18 years for forging those 2 checks." She said, wait, let me explain something. Sandra poisoned him. And how do I know that? Because I gave her pills that she took down, and she gave them to him, and he died. So Sandra poisoned him. All her husband did, was move the body and lie to you. So at that point, my wife gets charged with first-degree murder and 2 counts of special circumstances. Special circumstances mean they can put her to death. And they have 2 counts, which means that they're definitely going to get her on death row. They dropped the murder charges on me because apparently I didn't strangle him, and their state witness has just said she poisoned him. So now all they've got me for is an accessory after the fact and lying. It's only 2 things they could find. The maximum amount of time for those 2 things, if I had had a bad criminal record previously, would have been 4 years. The most of my time would have been if I'd been convicted on just those without, as I was, the most they could give me was 9 months. And I'd already served that in county jail, so I wouldn't have done anything. And of course, you can always argue that you lied to the cops because you're protecting your family. And most courts will go, yeah, we're not going to use that one against you either. So really, moving the body was the only thing. But because I had put my name and number in his wallet, it showed compassionate that I wasn't dumping him. I didn't damage him. I didn't do anything hurtful to the body, which is whole nother set of crimes. So they now had this point where they really didn't have anything for me. But they weren't going to let me go because I'm a biker and I'm a veteran, and they sure I got to have something more to do. So they take my wife to trial in December, and they get a hung jury. And they poll the jury, and 11 people want to put my wife to death. And one man says he couldn't vote that way because he could put my wife in prison for the rest of her life, but his conscience would not let him have a woman to be executed. So the DA is like, okay, now we know where we went wrong. We need to really get a good jury next time. But because they had 11 that were willing to do it, he figured he was definitely going to get it. So at this point, the man that had bought me had gone to the DA when the arrests originally happened. And he told him, Jamie didn't do it, but you can manipulate him very well emotionally because he wants his family. He'll care for his family. He'll sacrifice for his family. This man and I, like I said, we had a lot of bad blood between us. So one day, my wife's attorney, my attorney, and the district attorney comes to me and says, look, you're a man, aren't you? You love your wife, right? You love your son. Said, because your son was born before you two were married, you won't get custody of your son if she gets convicted, even if you get released. That'll go to her parents. So likely they'll be so mad at you because you let their daughter go to death row. You'll never see or hear from your son again. Having already suffered that with my oldest son that I hadn't seen since my first divorce. And they said, now here's another thing. Think about this. How's your son going to feel if he knows you have a chance to save his mother's life and you choose not to? You're a hero. You're a biker. You're a Vietnam veteran. So what do you really think you want to do here? So we're going to offer you a one-time deal. If you plead guilty to one count of first-degree murder and the forgeries and the accessories of forgeries, even though we know you didn't do any of it, if you plead guilty to this, you'll do 13 years and we won't ever oppose parole. You'll be out in time to see your son graduate high school. Your wife will love you forever because you saved her life. Your son will think that you're a stand-up guy. And nobody's going to hate you in the end. You got 15 minutes to make the decision. Because we're going to start picking another jury for your wife. So I turned to my attorney and she says, that's a heck of a deal. Do you think your wife can do time in prison? You were in Vietnam. Think prison's going to be harder than Vietnam? You ride motorcycles. Think anything you're going to come in prison is going to be harder than that? You're not somebody who gets in trouble. So you're going to program and you're going to get out. Not going to be a problem. 13 years, nothing. Can I talk to my wife? No, we can't let you do that. We don't want her to know there's a deal on the table. Okay, you got 10 minutes. Okay, you got 5 minutes. Well, you got 3 minutes. What you going to do? I said, okay, I'll do it. So I signed the paper. He brought me before a judge. And the judge said, are you taking responsibility for all these? Not did I do it. He asked me if I took responsibility for all. I said, yes, sir. It's okay. They gave me a sentence of 25 to life. But before when they offered me my deal, they showed me the California Penal Code, which is their book of laws and sentences stuff. And it said in there that I would be eligible for day good time behavior credits. And I would go to board at 13 years. And if I hadn't gotten any trouble, I would go home. And they weren't going to oppose it. It's what the law said. Okay, so I've got your word, and your word's going to be good to me. I've got the law. And of course, the law is always going to be correct because these are stand-up people. I got sentenced on the 14th of February. The day I got sentenced, the DA brought in and tried to bring my wife back to trial for the same charges that I pled guilty to, except with 2 counts of special circumstances. But she had been given a lawyer who was basically the top-notch lawyer in California, a guy named Ernest Kinney. And he ran into this jury pool and said, wait a minute, her husband just admitted all these, so how could she have done it if he did? And the jury was unanimous that my wife was not guilty. I go to prison on the 27th of February. I never saw my wife again because she moved on with her life. and I only had minimal contact with my son after he turned 20. I have 9 grandchildren and 2 sons in the United States that the United States government says I can never go back to see. And that's how I got to go to prison. Unfortunately, 5 years after I went to prison, they changed the law. They took away the halftime credits in 1989, which meant now that I didn't go to board in 1996. I don't go to board until 1999. And then they gave the governor the right to review and revoke and overturn any parole board hearings. Again, in 1989. But I'd been down 5 years. My argument always was that you can change the law, you can make a stiffer penalty, but there's a thing called ex post facto. And ex post facto says you cannot make a law, and this is California and United States Constitution law, cannot make a law that will negatively affect somebody and run it retroactively back and apply it. So by all rights, I should never have been one of the ones to lose my halftime, and I should never have had a governor take my date, which he did in 2013. He took my first date. And when I did get found suitable in 2017, I had to wait again for 5 months every day to see if he was going to give me my date back or if he was going to take it away and make me stay there. And so a guarantee 13-year sentence turned into 34 years. And the thing is that even in the probation officer's report that was sent to my sentencing judge, it said, Jackie did the checks, Sandra poisoned the man, and he moved the body.
Before we go to the prison stuff, then, let me just summarize on what he said. Basically, the woman who instigated the conspiracy, the wife of the deceased,
well, the daughter of the deceased.
or the daughter of the deceased, sorry, she inherited the money that she was after, so she got what she wanted. She had the motive to do
She was
this.
his sole beneficiary.
The extent of Jamie's wife, we don't know, but Jamie was basically played, took the fall for her, and then she moved on with another fellow right away, and Jamie just had to just sit in prison for the next 34 years. So what was it like entering Folsom Prison?
Well, entering Folsom Prison, and I'm sure most of you guys have probably heard Johnny Cash sing about it. Folsom Prison has what's called Eastgate, and it's like got this castle tower right there with a 30 caliber machine gun that was mounted in it to prevent any escapes. And you went through these big iron gates, and they used to take us in on a bus called the Grey Goose. It was a little like school bus, and it was just big enough to fit between these 2 big iron gates. And you'd drive in, it'd stop, and the big gate would slam behind you. And there was a sign on the front gate that said, "This is the end of the world. Nothing else exists." And you drive down and around, you come up through Westgate onto the yard. And on the days that they would bring buses in, they would not have yard that day. So no inmates are out on the yard, just those coming off the bus. And they'd bring us over and they'd stand us out in front of a thing called R&R, which is receiving and releasing. And they stand us up there, and the sergeant comes out and talks to you. And he gives you this nice little spiel. Welcome to Folsom State Prison. This was built in 1880 by convict blood and sweat. All this was built out of the granite. The prisoners carved out of this little valley here. We are the second oldest prison in the state. And he would be giving this talk. Well, for me, while he was giving this talk, suddenly out of this count gate that was right next to it, the gate slams wide open, and this little Hispanic kid comes running out, just running out as fast as he could. And within just a hair's breadth, a great big Hispanic guy comes running out with a 14-inch knife in his hand. The kid looks back one time, sees the guy how close he is, looks back, and hits the corner post on the yard fence. The guy rushes up on him and stabs him about a dozen times before throwing the knife down. None of the gunners, we had gunners all around the yard with Mini 14, kind of like the M16 civilian version. None of them had a chance to lock and load on this. Now the guy's throwing his knife down, hands up. They're not going to shoot him now. He surrendered. This guy's on the ground bleeding. We're all standing there. And the most surprising thing to me was that the sergeant had looked over there, looked back, and said, and as you notice, at any given moment here at Folsom State Prison, we have unscheduled extracurricular activities happening get used to it. And that was my first death at Folsom State Prison that I got to see.
And Jamie was in the prison system in California. This was before mass incarceration. There was only tens of thousands of people in the system. There was only 2 max security prisons. Since Jamie's been released, there's been millions of people put in the California state prison system. So the high-profile prisoners pretty much knew each other. So Jamie was housed, or he bumped into some of the most prolific serial killers, high-profile serial killers. One is Edmund Kemper, who was picking up college students and cutting their heads off and
dismembering them and eating them.
How was it when you first met him?
I met Edmund Kemper. Vacaville was Northern California Reception Center. And I arrived there on the 27th of February. 28th of February, I got called out for an orientation. All new people from the day before go to orientation. Go in this room. We're wearing these really almost fluorescent green uniforms. In come these guys in blue jeans and blue shirts. 3, 4 of them. Just regular guys hanging out. Suddenly in walks this guy, 6'9", 300 pounds. And he looks at us. And in a very dead, monotone voice, he says, "Every man must have a moral compass, and you must never stray from your compass." I had no idea who this guy was, but he speaks in this extremely monotone voice the whole time. It wasn't until a few days later that I find out that he's Edmund Kemper, or Big Ed as they called him, and that he'd killed his grandparents when he was 15, shot them. Had gone to a psych hospital for 6 years. The psychs told him, "You just need some confidence in yourself. You're perfectly okay." And he's saying, "Don't let me go. I'm feeling that not right." They said, no, that's called. He was 21 when they let him out of the psych hospital. A couple years later, he started picking up the co-eds, and he started killing them and cutting their heads off, and then he ate some parts. And then eventually his last 2 victims was his mother and his mother's best friend, because he was just really tired of his mom always complaining about him all of his life. And then he eventually called the police and turned himself in. Edward Kemper, ironically, helped start the hospice program for the first victims in prison with HIV and AIDS. He had this funny thing about it. He cared nothing about the living. He cared nothing about the dying. But the guys who were suffering with AIDS were in between life and death. And nobody else would care for them, because the staff at that time, this is early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, people didn't know. Everybody thought you could get it from just breathing the air. And he was one of the first people to go in there with just a mask and glove and actually give comfort. He's also read over 500 books onto tape for the blind in this very monotone voice.
And there was another killer on the loose at the same time as Ed, which was Herbert Mullin.
Herbie.
And you met him?
I knew Herbie for 7 years. And when I first met Herbie, I was at a prison called CMC. And I'd been told, that's Herbie out there. Herbie just looked like a hippie to me at that time. Had long hair. And I was getting ready to come back in off the yard one night, and he was out there dancing with these big headphones on. And Herbie calls me over. Never spoke to me before. Goes, come here. Listen to this. And he hands me these headphones. So I put them on, being polite. And I'm listening. And we've got stars above us, and I'm listening. I'm looking around, and I'm listening. And I'm thinking that the cord to this thing is attached to a cassette player somewhere. Because when I went to prison, cassettes were the high technology of the day. I look down, and I see he's holding the plug in his hand. And I go, well, what am I supposed to hear, Herbie? And he goes, sounds of the universe. And I went, what? And he goes, the stars are talking. Okay. Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot, Herbie. Yeah, that's cool. And I walked away. Then somebody told me a couple days later while I was on the weight pile, hey, you know about Herbie, right? I said, no. Yeah, Herbie killed 10 people. He's what we call the earthquake killer. And most of you are probably way too young to know, but in the 70s, there was a big problem about people concerned that half of California might slide off in the ocean when the earthquake on the San Andreas Fault cracked off. And they still say it's due any time. Well, he was born on the same day that the 1906 San Francisco earthquake had happened. So Herbie had come to understand that the reason no earthquake came after 1906 to affect California like that was that America had given up a lot of blood during World War I and World War II and Korea and Vietnam. Except now it's 1972 and they're winding it down. And as he says, a celestial voice spoke to him and said, look, if you kill people, I won't let the earthquake happen. Okay. Well, being the fact that business people were actually buying up farmland in the San Joaquin Valley, hoping to be the guys who had the next big shipping port once San Francisco was gone, this wasn't seemed to be too unreasonable for him to think, I would guess. So he kills 10 people. The first person he kills is a homeless man, who he said that man's mind told him he was Jonah and needed to be sacrificed, so he beat the man to death with a baseball bat. The next man he killed was a priest, where he went to go confess his sins. But that priest's mind reached out to Herbie and said, I'm really the best sacrifice because I'm a priest and I'm ready to meet my maker. So he stabs him to death in a confessional in a church where there are other people sitting waiting for the confession, and they get to watch the blood run out of the door as Herbie runs out all dressed in black, which the description that they gave the police was a frantic man in black. Okay, good description. The next ones that Herbie does is a hitchhiker, a female girl hitchhiker, who ironically was on the same road where Edmund Kemper picked up his people at the same time. So she missed out being picked up by Kemper, only to be picked up by Herbie. And he killed her and dismembered her and spread her body all along the roadside. But then he decided that was too sickening even for himself. So he never did that kind of killing again.
The most famous killer, well, he never actually got convicted of killing physically himself, but is Charles Manson, isn't it, for ordering people to kill?
Well, yeah. Well, they got Charlie basically for the conspiracies. They couldn't really prove that he actually had his hands on it, but he was enough to supposedly told them. And I met Charles Manson the second week I was in prison at Vacaville, where he worked as a gardener in the Catholic chapel. And I was a teenager when all the Manson murders went down. And so I wasn't really into watching news and TV back when I'd be out in my car driving around and stuff. So all I had to go on was that the news spoke so bad about him, I assumed he was a rather large and imposing man. So when I was pointing him out, and I realized he's about 5'2", 5'3", I went, really? That's Charlie Manson, huh? Not very impressed. I only spoke to him a couple of times while I was there. He was very unhappy that I didn't want his autograph because that was one of the ways he made money. He would get a rock off the yard, paint a flower on her, sign his name, sell you the rock. Yeah, it's $5. Don't worry about it. You know, of course, I've heard that they've been on eBay and sold for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, particularly his ID cards that the correctional officers used to make new ones, get him to sign them, and they'd kick him down $50, and then they'd sell them for $300 or $400. You know, because correctional officers are doing the right thing. You know. But like I said, I actually got to know Herbie quite well over the years. He told me that he had done approximately 1,000 hits of acid. You know, but he thought acid was God because it always opened his mind. But Herbie eventually killed, shortly after, he killed 4 boys he found in the forest because he thought they were littering. And he tried to get them to leave, and they pulled a rifle on him, so the next day he came and killed them all. And then he decided he wasn't going to do drugs no more. Thought maybe that was his problem. So he remembered who was the guy who gave him his first marijuana cigarette. Went over to that guy's house. The guy didn't live there anymore, so he met the girl that was there. And she said, well, I'll tell you where he lives, and gave him the address of the guy. So he went over to the guy's house, killed the guy and his wife. And on the way back, stopped at the girl's house, killed her. And those were his 10 murders. The thing was, there was no death penalty at the time Herbie got his. So he just got 2 7-to-life sentences and then a number of sentences that were less than 10 years apiece. But Herbie is still in prison. He's now Mule Creek. And hopefully he'll never get out, because like I say, I've met some people, and there are some people that I really hope get out. And Herbie's one of those ones that people like to say, thank God for penitentiaries. Because Herbie's favorite thing is, I just want to travel places, see things, And when he found out I was from the Isle of Man, his first thing was, I want to go there. I said, no, you don't. I said, no, you don't. Try Siberia, try Mongolia. Those are good open places. You get a lot of walking, but you don't want to go to Isle of Man. There's nothing there. It's dark and cloudy, so.
Another one who's never getting out is Charles Tex Watson. As
My
part
buddy.
of the Manson family, these guys went into actress Sharon Tate's house, who was 8 months pregnant. They were stabbing her to death, and she was begging for her life, and she said, please don't kill me, let me have the baby and kill me, and after 2 weeks, just let me live for 2 weeks and have the baby, and then you can kill me after I've had the baby. What was your interaction with him?
So I was rather lucky to have to know Tex for 7 years at CMC. And Tex and I had a very less than fond relationship with each other. He was in charge of the Protestant chapel. He had been given the privilege of being the inmate prison chaplain, because the staff prison chaplain hardly was ever there. And so he chose to do the preaching, and everybody referred to it as the gospel according to Tex. He determined whether you could participate in religious programs, self-helps that were done in the chapel and stuff. You could buy his book, Will You Die For Me? That was, merely like a $20 thing. And then give him another $10 and he'll sign Charles Watson, never Tex. But he lived in the cell above me for 4 years. And him and I had a number of different disagreements because for a number of years I had a cellie who had been a thalidomide baby. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but women back in the 40s, 50s took a thing called thalidomide. It was kind of supposed to be pre-Valium, supposed to be a mother's little helper, and it caused children to be born with no arms, no legs, flipper arms, stuff. And my cellie was born with a very stunted arm, and his legs were malformed. And Watson would tell him that was his mother's punishment and his punishment for her not being a good woman, because he was born out of wedlock. And my cellie wasn't used to people talking to him like that, didn't appreciate it. And my cellie was in for murder, and my cellie was going to go stab up Tex Watson. But Tex Watson was the only inmate that I ever knew in all the years I was in prison who the staff gave an alarm button to wear around his ankle, so if he ever got attacked, he could hit it, and the guards would come and rescue him. So when my cellie told me about this, I went and I jacked up Tex. Now Tex is about 6'4" or so, but at that time I was a bit thicker than I am now, and I have this way about not being intimidated by people who are taller than me, because basically I've never fought anybody smaller than me. Okay, so after we had our discussion and he told me that it wasn't my business stuff, okay, so I went back up to my cell, told my cellie I dealt with it. My neighbor said, hey, I got something here you might want. You ever hear of the White Album? So he gives me the Beatles' White Album. A lovely song called Helter Skelter on it, which is one of the words they wrote on the walls of the killing houses. So for about 2 to 4 hours that night, I played Helter Skelter through the vent to him. He went and told the sergeant on me, and the next day he came search my cell. I didn't have the tape. I slid it across the hall to another guy who took it out, gave it back to the guy I got it from. Wasn't me. Told him he must be having some kind of flashbacks. So the interesting thing was that we never were cordial, and then we had to leave CMC. I was going back to another medium security prison, and he was going to a protective custody prison because they were changing up things. And you get on a bus, and one of the things they tell you on a prison bus, don't talk to anybody but the guy beside you, and talk very silently. This is being told to you by generally a guard in the back of the bus with a shotgun, and the guard in the front of the bus with a shotgun, and they have no sense of humor. Tex gets the seat behind me. No sooner than we get off prison grounds, he goes, "Hey, what do you think it's going to be like?" And it's about as loud a voice you could get. The guard in back says, "Hey, you two stop talking." I'm not talking. You know. He starts asking more questions to me. Guard in the front says, "Hey, I heard you two were supposed to stop talking." I'm not talking. I'm not saying a thing. We get down the road about an hour, they pull the bus over. Guard comes over. We're shackled on the bus, ankles, waist chains, handcuffs. They come up to us, and they look at me and said, "We told you two to stop talking." Wait a minute. You know, I'm not the one talking, you know. They said, "Well, we heard you." "No, you didn't hear me. You know, you better take that somewhere else." And Tex says, "I'm just talking to my friend." "Well, you two sit together then." I said, "Absolutely not. I hated this man the last 7 years. I'm not going to sit with him on the bus." You know, that worked out well. We ended up doing about 11 to 12 hours on that damn bus. Every chance he got, he'd go, "What do you think it's going to be like at this next prison?" We get to Mule Creek first, and they take most of the guys off to Mule Creek. And Charles Watson, he's still sitting on the bus with me. And there's only about 3 of us on there besides him. We watch this guard come up. He taps on the window. We look down. He's unloading property out of the side of the bus. The first thing he unloads is a word processor that Watson was allowed to have by a court order. And it says, "Fragile, this side up, do not drop." Officer raises it as high as he can, drops it to the ground, kicks it across the room, picks up another box, throws it down on top of it, throws another box on top of it, throws another box on top of it, kicks them all around. Then the sergeant comes on the bus and says, "Well, Mr. Charles, Tex Watson, come on down. You're a winner on The Price is Right." Took him off, put his face against the wall, and 3 of the biggest correctional officers I've ever seen came out, and he's 6'4", and he was dwarfed by them. And they sat there and yelled at him for a good 5 minutes before they took him inside. There's only 3 of us inmates on that bus. We all looked at each other and said, "Glad we're not him, because we know this ain't going to be good." And then we went on to our own place, and I never got to see him again. But this is a man that started a prison ministry. This is a man that used the system to get married, have 3 children, get his wife on welfare, get all the donations for his ministry to buy his house, buy his car, all tax-free, can't be touched. He's written a number of books, but generally he just manipulates the people he's around. But he unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, will never see the streets again. They're never going to let him, because they know he was the guy who took the girls both times to kill all those people, and he did the majority of the stabbing, and is said to be the one that cut the baby out of Sharon Tate's body.
So when Jamie had settled down, he started to help the younger prisoners come in, do legal work for them and stuff like that. What was your philosophy helping these guys coming in?
Well, one of the things that I used to tell a lot of young guys to try to keep them from getting caught up in the mix. I said, when you get in here, somebody's going to want to come and talk to you. They might want to come talk to you because you're from a city they know, or where they're from, or because of the color of your skin, length of your hair. And I said, the first thing you should say is, what are you going to do to help me get out of prison? Because if they're not willing to do something to help you get out of prison, they're wanting to help you stay in prison. And I told him, I said, the guy may not be able to do nothing more then encourage you to study, encourage you to take self-help, encourage you to get a trade, encourage you to stay in touch with your family. You may not be able to do anything other than that, but that alone is generally enough to help somebody be avoided. And I told them, when the gangs come to you, the one thing I learned about gangs is they don't like somebody smarter than their leader around. So they're not going to induct somebody into the gang who's smarter than the guy who's trying to lead them. So I'd always tell them, if you're reading books, every time they see you got books in your hands, you're reading books, they're going to avoid you like you have the plague, because they don't want to catch what you got. And I even did challenges with a few people where I tell them, you're going to come back. I can tell you're going to come back, because I could read some people. And one particular guy I told that to, he decided to get really mad about me giving him that ultimatum. So when he got out, he got a job, started going back to college, started taking care of his wife and kids. About a year after he got out, he sent me a card saying, I'm successful. I just got off parole. I've got a job. I've gone to college. I'm getting a degree. He goes, you were wrong. I wrote him back and said, congratulations. He writes me back and says, you asshole, you tricked me. And that's what the whole thing was, is I never became institutionalized. This was something that both two of my number of board hearings had said, and they said that was because, for me, my situation was when I went into prison, I always focused on I was going to get out one day. So I didn't really focus on how to live in prison and be a prisoner. I focused on how to live one day again as a free man. I've been out since February. I'm struggling a bit. There's many new things, but I'm getting there.
Well, I'll just say a few things. All right, so Jamie, he completely bypassed the internet. He's only just recently learned to set up an email. We were doing some filming with him today. I told everybody to turn their phones off, and Jamie hadn't figured out how to turn his phone off, so it was left there and it started just ringing during the filming. And even when he got it out of his bag, he still couldn't even figure out how to turn his phone off. You know, this guy, he's gone through 34 years in here for this crime he didn't do, and to come out and to see this positive spirit in his eyes, and not to be seriously mentally ill like I would have been if I'd have done 34 years. I would be in an institution by now. We've only been able to speak to you guys for an hour so far. We've already recorded 8 hours of story with him. There's so much more. His story is so big. He was constantly under threat in prison from the Aryan Brotherhood. A shot call up at our green light. He had to defend himself. He was using his army skills, fighting these Aryan Brotherhood gang members over and over and over. There's a lot more on YouTube about these stories, but we just don't have time to tell you all these here tonight. Did any of you guys find out about this story through YouTube? No. Few people, okay. Who found out about it through Facebook and Funzing? Most people, okay, great. So Jamie, he's got some people that he's staying with in London, and they are helping him, but he doesn't have much going on in his life right now. I pledged to try and get his story out as a book, and to help him become a public speaker. So, you know, this is the very first time he's come out and spoke to an audience tonight. The first time I spoke to an audience, I was so nervous I couldn't even eat my breakfast. I paced like a prisoner in a cell at the front of the room like this, all this raw, nervous energy crackling off me. So for Jamie to come out tonight and speak to you guys with this dodgy sound system, and be able to hold it together and convey his story, you know, I'm just so proud of this guy. He's got the absolute heart of a mountain lion, and I think he deserves a round of applause. Like I mentioned, you know, trying to help Jamie get launched as a public speaker. So, and this is his first talk, Funzing are going to ask for you to review this event this evening. So, what you put down, you know, will determine whether they keep helping Jamie get out there and do talks, and hopefully we can get him doing talks across the country. So, do appreciate any reviews if you've enjoyed this evening. Now, we're going to start to take the questions, actually. So, who's the first person who would like to ask a question? Yes.
So I was wondering, having gone through the last 10 years with shows like Making a Murderer and Serial, getting a lot more popularity, how are those kind of shows received inside prison? Are they like,
Let me repeat the question
received, but give people hope, or like how do they come across?
So he's asking, with shows like Making a Murderer and the increased popularity of the crime genre in media, how is that received in prison?
This may shock and surprise you, but most of the guys don't watch those shows. They prefer Criminal Minds. They prefer CSI. They prefer the ones that deal with Special Victims Unit. They like those kind. Anything that has more of an actual factual thing generally doesn't keep the attention of most of the guys in prison. And those that do, there are some that feel that getting more attention out there is good, but we didn't get a lot of the kind of some of the programs you guys get over here. None of the prisons I was at did we ever see a program called Banged Up Abroad. Never had it. So we didn't know any of those things until I came over here and heard about them. But yeah, generally most of the guys like to watch those crime ones where they took pieces from a crime and then they, made it, because there were actually some guys going, "Hey, that was my crime," and so it was that kind of thing. They used to have this one program where it was like America's Most Wanted, and I got to meet a number of guys who got caught on that. Of course, when they would watch the episode where they were caught, their general response was, "Oh, that ain't the way it went down." Yeah. No, man, they didn't catch me sleeping in my, Playboy Bunny sex underwear. I fought them at the door with guns blazing. Yeah. So it was always kind of funny in that respect. But that's intellectual stuff most guys in prison don't really do.
All right, next question, please. Yes, over here.
Just listening to your story, it does sound as if there was a miscarriage of justice. Do you want to go back and revisit it and try to get, is there a chance that you could get compensation? Is there interest from anyone in following up on that?
So she's asked about, with it being a miscarriage of justice, if Jamie would ever sue and try and get any kind of compensation or acknowledgement for what's happened.
Okay, well, to enlighten you with the American criminal justice system, if you can prove you were wrongly convicted, you then have to apply to the state legislature of the state you're in. And if they would like to, they will give you $100 for every year you were wrongly incarcerated. But generally, you cannot sue the prosecutors. You cannot sue the judges. You cannot sue the arresting officers. You cannot sue prison people, any of that, because they have the thing of color of authority. They have an immunity from prosecution. The only satisfaction that I have to gain out of all of it is I've outlived every single one of those people. Every person involved in my case, from the arresting officers to even the stenographer who typed it up, have all passed away since I've been down. So in a way, I won. Last man standing, they say. Of course, the fact is that I can never go back to the U.S. and I'm hoping to, at some point in time, once I figure out this Facebook thing, to eventually contact some of my older grandchildren, and maybe, if nothing else, I might be able to go to Canada and meet them there. If not, they'll have to come over here. Though I do have two granddaughters that their mother, who was Irish, took them back to Ireland. So I'm in a current search for them because they're two twins and one of them is named after my mother. And I thought it'd be nice to let her know about her great-grandmother that she's named after.
Okay, next question, please. Yes?
What was your biggest motivation to go through prison?
What motivated Jamie to get through prison? His biggest motivation?
My biggest motivation to get through prison was the fact is that I don't like to lose. the U.S. Marine Corps gave me certain models to live by. One of them was that I went was hold my mud. Hold your mud was a standard saying. Means you stand your ground. You don't give an inch. We hold that mud no matter what comes to us. Another one was, improvise, adapt, and overcome. But one of the other bigger things that kind of helped me when I started dealing against trouble with the Aryan Brotherhood was that I was with Marine Force Recon, which is Marine Corps Special Forces, kind of like Navy SEALs or the British SAS. And over our barracks doors, we had this saying, some men fear men. Some men fear monsters. And recon is what the monsters fear.
Next question, please. Yes.
So what started your trouble with the Aryan Brotherhood? What was the beginning of that?
He asked what started his trouble with the AB, the Aryan Brotherhood.
Well, when you arrived at Folsom State Prison, the first thing came off the bus before you was this paper card called a 103B card. And it told them who you were, what your crime was, and what county you came from. And at that time, the whites had a thing about if you were from San Francisco or Fresno or San Diego, they'd send a representative from that area to come go because you're a homeboy. And so I'm in my single cell in the orientation row. And this great big blonde guy steps up the door and goes, "Yo, homie, you're from Fresno, huh?" And I looked him hard in the eye and went, "Konas tatu makara, chikush majen, maski me. America tu, sha." And he blinked a couple of times, looked at me, looked down the tier and went, "Are you sure this guy's white? He doesn't even speak English." So he went away. A couple days later, somebody had heard me talking to this Portuguese guy upstairs through the vent in English. So they send this really big white boy down to my cell. And I was sitting in my cell, not facing the bars, and suddenly it got dark. I looked up, and this guy blocked out all the light from the bars. He goes, "Hey, you're from Fresno, right?" And I went, "Konas tatumla." He goes, "Cut that crap." He goes, "I know you can speak English." I told him, "Well, English is my second language because Gaelic was my first." And he goes, "What's Gaelic?" I said, "It's what the Irish, the Manx, and the Scots speak." And I happen to have learned that because the woman who took me to America and raised me as my mom taught me Gaelic when I was a little boy. And until I was almost 6 or almost 7, it was the only language I knew. But then she thought, being blonde hair, and you can't tell now, but I had kind of copper brown hair in Arizona, speaking only Gaelic, might front us off. So I had to learn English. But the whole time I was with her, we kept Gaelic as a mommy speak. It was our secret language between us. So when I told the guy, I said, "Well, I'm a Celt," because that's how I identified myself. Never identified myself as white. And if you look at my back arms, they say Manx bred because I was born on the Isle of Man. So I was proud of that. I wasn't, any part of that white, wood, pecker, any of those other funny names people like to give each other over there. And so he goes, "What's a Celt?" And I told him, like Irish, Manx, Scot. And he goes, "Oh, I'm Irish." And I said, "But you don't speak the language." Well, no, it's hard. Yeah, well, if it's that hard, you don't want to be Irish then. And they didn't like the fact that when they told me I should come out for a meeting, I told them, "I don't need you guys. I can do my own time." And they're like, "No, you have to do our time the way we tell you." No, that ain't happening. So they decided they were going to challenge me to go into the Smokers, which is a boxing ring they had on the main yard. And if you got challenged, you basically had to go in or you'd get stabbed if you didn't go in. So I went in there, and they sent a couple different guys again to me more than a few times I went in there. Problem was they didn't know what my military background was, and they underestimated me, and I won. And the problem is when you beat the guys they send against you, that tends to aggravate them because it makes them look weak.
And there's actually a 40-minute video on YouTube about all the fights they had with them. It's got 2.5 million views. It only went up last month. I think it's called "What If a Shot Caller Puts a Green Light on You in Folsom Prison." So if you want to check the full story out and get all the details of that one. All right, who has got the next question then, please? Who else has got anything? Yes. At the back.
Hi. I just wonder whether, on reflection, you think that if you
Okay, she asked about basically the extent of his trust in his wife and the authorities.
Okay, as far as with my wife, my heart wanted to believe her because she was my wife and the mother of my son. So I wanted to believe the thing. I was angry at her because she invited the man over when I told her not to, which she had deeply apologized for while I was in jail. As far as the authorities, unfortunately, you would think that if I had gone to him, it would have worked out better. But what you're hearing tonight and the 8 hours of video I've done with him is only a small drop of my life. And so there is a lot of stuff that went on behind the scene that I only learned about in the last few years, that the man who bought me played a big part in ensuring that I would be convicted, because I was becoming a danger to him if I ever really started looking into who I was, how he got me, and what happened to the other boy.
All right, next question, please. Yes, on this side.
What was the first thing you did when you got out? And why?
What was the first thing you did when you got out? And why?
First thing I did when I got back, I arrived at Heathrow, which turned out to be the longest walk I've ever done, trying to get out of it. And I was lucky to be met by my friend's mom, and I got on the tube, first time I've ever been on a tube. She was quite concerned that I might not deal with it that well. Actually, I did better than she did because the lights went out a couple of times. But the first thing I did the following day was I went out in the big garden she had out back, sat by the frog pond, and tried to actually accept that I was out of prison, that I was free, and I had a life to look forward to.
I'm just going to add a little bit onto that then. How are you finding adjusting to this modern life now with all of the change in technology, etc.?
The technology has been challenging at times. There's been a few restrooms I've gone into that took me a while to figure out how the facilities worked. I have had some problems with my cell phone, which I can't either answer texts, read texts, or do texts. I can't figure out how to find out when it tells me I missed a call, what's that mean, and how do I not miss the call? I am completely baffled about YouTube, even though I've got a number of videos on it, some by Shaun and some by my friend that put them on. And the fact that I keep hearing that the numbers are over 3 million on combined numbers and stuff, I have a hard time understanding there's actually that many people that took time to actually hear me or look at anything about me. Even if they didn't like me, the fact that they actually took the time not to like me was something that's been kind of hard. I'm getting better on buses. I'm doing better on the tube. I've gone out of London only twice, one to St. Albans and one to Gloucester. I'm hoping to get around more, but I'm doing it somewhat slowly. But like I told a few people here, a little over 2.5 weeks ago was the first time I was out by myself at night in almost 35 years. And I came here for a Funzing talk, just because I didn't know what a Funzing talk was. I didn't know. I mean, as I said, the last time I had gone out at night, we went to a bar where people drank and threw bottles at the bands. I mean, so I didn't know what they did nowadays in the evening. So there was a bit of a surprise and a change, but it's getting better every day. I'm hoping to get more involved. I have done a few things I want. My friend's mom doesn't let me do tourist things because I'm British and we don't do tourist things.
Follow on this a little bit more then. So what is an average day like for you these days?
Well, this is really going to bore you guys. Right now, my regular days currently at this time is I'm helping my friend's mom remodel her Victorian home because I have industrial and building maintenance background skills. So I've been learning how to work in a house that was built in a way that nobody builds houses in America. She had warned me that she was going to need some plaster work done. I told her, not a problem. Done a lot of plaster work. Got over here and come to find out they were talking about actually putting plaster on a wall, not putting plaster board, or what we call drywall in America, up. That was one of those things that was interesting. I help with the garden. I help put up partition walls. I painted. I'm doing things just to help her out, to save her some cost, and fill in my time so I can figure out what the next step is going to be.
All right, brilliant. All right, next question, please. Yes, here, yes.
Hi. Have you ever wanted to blame anyone at all?
He doesn't strike me as someone who harbours any kind of resentment for what he's been through. And that's one of the incredible things about Jamie. She's asking, do you blame anyone at all?
I think that blaming doesn't solve any problems, just like regrets. So no, I haven't really blamed anybody. If anything, I've taken my own responsibility that there were things I could have done different. There's things I may have been able to handle in other ways. But, I can't be responsible for other people's actions, good or bad. So my thing is that I harbor no ill will to my ex-wife. She didn't hold up to what I thought she would. But no, I don't blame anybody. And like I said, I don't have the time and rest of my life. I'm going to be turning 65 in 3 months. I haven't got time to waste on thinking about that.
Wow. Okay, next question, please. Yes.
Do you have or have you ever had faith?
Asked about his faith.
Well, this is one of those kind of tricky questions here, because it depends on what you're really talking about there. The woman who raised me, being from Ireland, my first understanding about anything deity-wise were the ancient Celtic gods. So the first time I actually had walked into a church, I was probably maybe 8 or 10 years old, and I saw this poor man hanging up on a cross, and somebody said, "That's our God." And I went, "And you did that to him?" It was hard for me to accept that. But I grew up with the idea of people like Brian Boru, Cuchulainn, all these great Celtic kings and warriors, and Boudica, who you've got a statue of not down here in London, and the strength of the people. And since I believed I was of those people, I drew on that kind of strength. So when I got to prison, a lot of people in prison gravitate towards religion in a way of trying to show that they're better than they were, or that they're ready to go home. Since I've never been conventional, and the only thing I knew about was the Celts, I chose to force the state of California to recognize me as the first pagan druid in California. Not only that, but I actually forced them over the years to give me religious grounds at a number of places. And I helped other inmates who were following different types of pagan or nature religions be allowed to practice their religions, up to and including just before I left Old Folsom, and I did get grounds at Old Folsom next to the Native American grounds, I actually became the first inmate minister of a non-Christian faith. And so that's my faith was in the strength of what I considered my ancestors, and the idea that I was one day going back to my ancestral homes. And here I am.
That just led me on to another question. So when Jamie is finally getting released, you go from the state prison system then over to deportation, like federal deportation. And they say, we can't tell you when we're going to send you home for your own security purposes, so you never know when you're getting out. So Jamie, with his legal skills that he'd learned over the years, he started to help the other prisoners, and that ended up expediting the process. Didn't I? I'll let him tell you a bit about that.
So I'm in an Immigration and Custom Authority thing, and instead of putting us in one of the federal facilities, they put us in a county jail unit. So we don't have any of the privileges we'd have in the federal system. And I'm in there with a lot of people who are from Central and South America, Asia, Middle East. And they all want to go to America. They want to stay in America, but they need to get asylum. So they have to explain why they need asylum, how bad it is in their country, what's happened to them or their family. So the Immigration and Custom officials come out and they hand these guys a 100-page application, said, fill this out. Don't scratch anything out. Don't misspell any words. Give it back to us and we'll review it and see if you qualify for amnesty. So these guys get all these things, and most of them can't speak English. Most of them certainly can't spell in even their own language. So I said, well, come talk to me. So they come and talk to me, and they tell me their stories about how their villages were destroyed by the government or by rebels, or how this faction or that faction, killed family members they were afraid to go home and stuff. And I said, let's do this. So I put together 26 asylum packets, got like 19 of them granted before I left. I had the immigration agent come to me, pull me aside and tell me, you've been doing these, haven't you? And I said, yeah. He says, yeah, we asked them how they got these done. They said, oh, Jamie did them for us. And he says, don't do that. I said, why? He goes, because before you got here, we'd only had 2 applications in the last 4 years, and none of them even got to the court. He says, you've already got 19 out of 26 granted. You're going to let these people stay in this country? I said, not my country. And he said, well, you need to stop this. I said, you need to send me home. And in a certain amount of way, I thought that did expedite it. Though I do need to also point out that while I was waiting for the governor's decision, my friend's mom contacted her MP and got him to write a letter to the governor of the state of California asking to, basically be kind to me and send me home. And a copy of that letter got sent to the prison, and I got grabbed up by some of the security officers and taken down to the counselor's office, where an associate warden of the prison, which is like the second highest guy in the prison, and the captain of the institution, and lieutenant of the squad, and sergeant of the squad, and all the counselors stand there going, why did you have the Prime Minister of England write this letter? And I looked down and said, what? And they said, right here, it says, and it gave the guy's name, which I can't quite pronounce, MP. And somehow those people there thought MP meant Prime Minister. And they were extremely unhappy. Now, the other side of the funny coin was that I did throw out a little thing about that my friend's mom's last name is maiden name was Windsor. And I said, well, if this doesn't get me home, she'll be talking to her cousin who might take a break from some of her royal. And they go, don't you do? So, I've been kind of a thorn at times in the sides of the government and things, and I've always tried to be on the side of the person that was downtrodden and needed help, and was going to be bullied by somebody because I don't like bullies. And like I said in the beginning of this, I don't like people who hurt children, women, or elderly. Unfortunately, I'm becoming elderly.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, no, I don't know if it's okay to ask. Did you ever find out why your adopted dad resented you, and also what happened to the previous kid?
Did he find out why his adopted dad resented him, and what happened to the previous child?
Well, apparently part of the reason he resented me was he supposedly paid $10,000 for me, and I didn't do what he would tell me when he told me. We don't know exactly what happened to the child, but being that I took his whole identity, his social security number, his date of birth, his name, and he's never come forward to argue about that, it's been pretty well accepted by the federal government, everything, that boy doesn't live today, and he probably didn't live at the time he was taken away. We do know that this particular man was involved in a lot of government things, and this child may have died during something that he was involved in.
Okay, next question, please. Yes? Are you still in touch with the prisoners?
You know, there are a number of guys that I knew for almost the entire time I was in prison, 30 years, 25 years, 20 years. Quite a few that I was still housed with for the last 12 years. When I came over here, I did notify them that I got home safe, because that's one of the things people always worry about. Guy gets out, you never hear from him again. Did he actually get home? I don't know if any of you ever saw a movie called Soylent Green. And they take them and they turn them into biscuits, and everybody gets to eat the biscuits. So I made sure they knew I got home safely to the UK.
How did you notify them?
Well, because most of I lived with a lot of them, and I took their names and numbers down, but then there's a thing called the California Locator. So I can look them up, find out what prisons they are, and then I can find the address. I've written to about 30 of them. Only about 3 continue to write to me today. One was my cellie I had for 8.5 years when I was at DVI. He had a type of autism, you know, called Asperger's syndrome. And he was very badly treated at trial, very badly treated in prison. And more than a few times I had to explain to people, you know, don't mess with him, because he's just doing his time. You don't like the way he looks, you don't like the way he shakes, but he's not hurting nobody.
So different states have different laws about prisoners being able to contact prisoners who are still incarcerated, prisoners who've been released. In Arizona, I was writing to the prisoners that I was incarcerated with, and then the prison rounded them all up and said, you're no longer allowed to write to me. So they just send the letters now to somebody else, and he forwards them to me because they've got constitutional right to send their mail and receive their mail. I was going to ask you on the back of that, are you writing to any of the prisoners in California? Are even you allowed to do that?
Well, here he's right. Technically, I'm not allowed to do that. And if I was in the United States and I did it, they could arrest me and put me back in jail. I'm in London. And the other thing is that they would watch for my mail to come under Morgan Kane, which is how they called me in prison. I send my mail as Jamie Kane. They don't know who Jamie Kane is. So, you know, it's kind of like doing the old Jedi trick. These are not the droids you want. And they may go now. And with the correctional department, mailroom staff, if the names don't look the same, you must be 2 different people.
Okay, next question, please. Yes? Has he been to the Isle of Man, or is he going?
I definitely want to go there. I have a lot of places that are connected to my family. My grandparents were the longest married couple on the Isle of Man. They married in 1911. When they died in 1981, they died 6 days apart and 53 days shy of their 70th wedding anniversary. In 1971, the Queen sent my grandparents congratulations. I have the full page newspaper article about that. My grandparents owned a hotel that's still there, though it's now an office building. I would like to go there and walk this thing. I would also like to go to the road that I was born in when when my mother got kicked out of my grandparents' hotel, and I had to be midwifed by some elderly women in a hovel. The hovels aren't there anymore, but I would like to go there. So right now, honestly, depending on what my situation is next spring, I would like to go over there to do that. If I'm really able to do it, I would like to do it during the motorcycle race TT's time, because I like motorcycle races. And where I was born is actually one of the corners of the race. I like to stand at the corner and wave at everybody when they go by. So I do have plans, but that will all depend on what my stability is by the time that comes up. Like I said, currently I have about 8 friends, and they're very close, and basically they've taken me in, made me family. So I'm still reaching out to try to expand my horizons, but at this point, that's where I'm at.
On that note of stability then, to go through what you've been through and to come out and be here now in London, you know, you've come out here and you spoke and you're very confident and you speak very well, but there's got to be some inner turmoil from that 34 years. So psychologically, flashbacks, nightmares, are there any things like that that you're having to deal with, and what kind of coping mechanisms, or like I do yoga and meditation, that got all my stuff down. Is there anything like that you're doing to deal with it?
Well, in prison, I did a lot of meditation. That was part of what I also learned with doing with the Celtic stuff. I dealt that. So I did do that. I haven't done that much meditation since I've been back. But basically, I just try to fill my time with the work that I'm doing, with making plans that may or may not actually come about. But really the only flashback type things, like I said, that I've had problems with is people wanting to blow off large explosions around me with this Guy Fawkes and these other things going on. So basically, I've stayed in the house and put earplugs in and things like that to get through that. But
What kind of sounds trigger that?
well, like I said, if you have a string of firecrackers, it sounds like a machine gun fire. If you set off large explosions, and for some reason, rockets' red glare, that's always appears to me be artillery shells coming in. Yeah, it's just, for some reason, they seem to make the same kind of colors and sounds when they come firing in. But because I haven't dealt with too much of that, it really hasn't been. Now, I have had a couple of instances where the tube or the buses were so crowded that I had to get off and either catch the next one or change over to another thing. But the thing was, the question I was asked when they were going to deport me, the only question the judge was concerned with was if I feared for my life coming back to London. And I pondered it for a second and said, no, why? And in actuality, I have felt more welcomed, more comfort being here. I feel like I'm home.
You are, man, you are, Jamie, yeah. Okay, next question, please. Yes.
Did you ever consider ending your life in prison?
Did he consider suicide in prison?
I'll be quite honest, yes. And the reason being is that I lost a number of guys who were very close to me in prison. And even now, there's a couple of guys that are still there who have decided they're never going to come out, and they've stopped going to boards just because they don't see a future outside, so they're willing to accept the life they're allowed in there. And the biggest problem for me was I wasn't getting no mail, I wasn't getting any visits, had no idea where anybody was, and it seemed like I had my back up against the wall. And I had to actually do a heart-to-heart with myself. And I said, if you do that, they win. If you make it through this, you win. If you make it through this and you stay happy, you're more of a success than they'll ever be, no matter what they do. And that's what actually pulled me out of my depression. That's what pulled me out of all the other things and gave me the same strength to go on to do that with other people, explaining to them is that you can only win if you beat them, you know, and you can't let them win. And even if you die in prison, as long as you didn't give up, you still won. And that's just what I've been doing. I'm going to be happy one day. I'm going to be successful. And there are a few things I'd like to have in the future. Not big things. I don't have a lot of wants. But one day I'm going to own another puppy. And one day I'm going to have another little motorcycle to work on. But other than that, I'm not looking for a lot.
Okay, next question, please. Yes.
Hi there. Staying with the trails, there's nothing that can prepare you for prison.
Was your mental strength conditioned before prison, Vietnam War?
I I think that my military and my Vietnam experience fortified my strength. I think that I had a certain amount of it already ingrained in me when I was little, because that was one of the things that used to scare the man that had bought me, is that when he'd beat me, I wouldn't cry. I would just stand up and look at him. So I had already decided I would not allow myself to be a victim by people bigger than me, tougher than me, things like that. So when I went in the military, like I said, I didn't go in to be a combat soldier. I never wanted to take a life. But my training gave me the ability to defend my wounded men's lives, even if I had to take somebody else's life. And in prison, that same strength and skills allowed me to survive and win again. And when people saw that I was able to do that, then I was able to actually allow other people to believe in themselves.
Okay, right. Next question, please. Yes.
Have you developed any new hobbies since you came to prison?
Any new hobbies post-release?
Well, I haven't really developed any new hobbies since I left prison, but while I was in prison, I did quite well at wood carving and have done quite a bit. I've actually had a number of my art pieces displayed at the Royal Festival Hall, and some of them have sold. I've done a lot of drawings. Some are better than others. I did beadwork, I did leather work, but woodworking was one of my favorites. Currently, I haven't really. I'm still getting things together so I can continue on with doing hobbies and stuff, which I enjoy doing. But like I said, everything is really kind of slow because I'm just getting my footing back, and for some reason, and I don't know why, the days go by much faster out here than they ever did in prison.
Two brilliant charities out of London helped Jamie. Cursler Trust, which helps prisoners rehabilitate through art. They helped me as well. They put me on the mentor scheme. And also Prisoners Abroad, who actually alerted me about Cursler Trust and helped me enter a short story contest. Jamie as well has been entering multiple times into Cursler Trust. We've got some of his art up here. Do you want to just say a few words on some of these and I'll flick through them?
Well, this gentleman here, Rusty Mills, is the guy I was talking about. I met him the second day I was in prison. I heard from him this last July, and he told me, I'm done. I'm not going to do another thing for the board. I'm never going to a board hearing. He'd gone to the board and he asked them to give him a 15-year denial, which is the most they could do, because he told them I'll be 75 when I come back up. Give me another 15, we're through. And they told him, sorry, you don't do enough bad stuff. We can only give you 5 years. He goes, well, give me 5 and you'll never see me again because I'm not coming back. I'll send my ID card. And the thing was that he has the privilege and the fact that he can fix anything. He was fixing cell phone chargers for the guards, cell phones for the inmates, TVs, everything else like that. And because he was doing work for the guards as well as the inmates, the guards turn a blind eye to the fact that he has soldering irons and tools and things like that in his cell because he's of value to him. But Rusty will never come out again. And he just sees there's nothing out here for him. Well, that bike, that was one of my hobby things. Yeah,
Do you want to go back?
yeah, go back. That was a wooden motorcycle that I built for a daycare center when they asked us for make cribs and beds and motorcycle. They asked for rocking horses. I told the guy I don't do rocking horses, I'll do rocking motorcycle. So I made that, and I made it wide enough so it wouldn't tip over even if there were 5 or 6 kids growing up on it. And this is a guy here who had picked up life sentence when he originally started with a 2-year drug thing. And as soon as he got that, then he went and got the tattoo on his back because he felt that God had forgotten him by allowing him to be tricked into doing a killing. These are a couple of pictures I drew from the idea of AdSeg. That's a window in AdSeg, so that's what you look out through. So you can see what the view outside is. The other is when you're looking out through the bars, because they usually keep the cells dark for you. So there's usually not light in there. So the only light you're going to have is when you stick your face partially out of the bars. This was my one called Nowhere Man, and this one was at the Royal Festival Hall. This one actually sold, and I actually received 140 pounds for it. This is where I was marking off the days, and as you see down there, it says, "May I see Britain once more." Mother is the name of God on the lips and in the hearts of children. So I had different things on there. I'm still here after all these years, because I needed somebody to know that I hadn't forgotten how much time I'd already done, and this was only in 2010. Go back. Okay. So this was me with the idea that you never give up the fight. And if you can see the chains being pulled off the wall, because like I said, I felt that even if you couldn't break down the walls, if you can at least crack them by beating the system, enough people beat the system, the walls do fall.
Cursler Trust have an annual art exhibition in the Royal Festival Hall. It's just finished for this year. It's in the spirit level downstairs. It's free to go, but it'll be back up next year. It's up for about a month. So if you are in the area, feel free to just go in there and check the prisoners' art out. I do appreciate all of your questions. We have gone into overtime here, and really appreciate all your interest in Jamie's story. And like I said, Funzing, I'll ask you to leave a review. And hopefully we can get more of these events arranged with Jamie in the future. So can I have a big hug, please, Jamie?
Thank you.